At the full moon, when dogs howl, men go mad. Witches gather for bizarre rituals under its full light. Its pull on the sea helped bring forth life on Earth. Does the moon's relentless grip rule our lives? Does it bring good luck or disaster? The Quest explores the mystifying power of the moon. In 1589, the villagers of Bedburg, Germany, were caught in the grip of unspeakable horror. A citizen named Peter Stubb made an incredible confession. When he was 12 years old, he was visited by the devil one night when the moon was full. The devil gave him a leather belt. When he placed it around his waist, he was suddenly transformed. From that day, whenever the moon was full, Stubb would put on the belt. Tracked down and captured by 2 hunters, Stubb confessed to a reign of terror lasting 25 years. In his rampages, he slaughtered sheep, goats and cows, and dozens of men, women, and children. He even admitted killing his own son and eating him. The Quest explores what unearthly power the moon holds over mere mortals. The pages of history are spattered with catastrophe played out under a full moon. The meltdown of the Soviet nuclear plant at Chernobyl in 1986. The terrorist bombing of a Pan Am jet over Lockerbie, Scotland in 1988. To say nothing of Germany's invasion of Poland in 1939. These are just a few examples of dark tragedies under a bright moon. As the full moon shines over Dade County, Florida, the Metro Dade police prepare to hit the streets.
They've been vandalizing his cars in his driveway. He lives at 9221 West
The date,
Club Drive.
May 30th. The time, midnight to 8 a.m., the graveyard shift.
Thursday, May 30th at 9 o'clock, there was a home invasion robbery at 153.
If the moon can generate mayhem, this should be a busy night.
Some sergeant came up and said, you know, there is a full moon out tonight. Looks like it's going to be busy. Me laughing, went out on the road, and it was a very busy night. Calls backed up. Even priority calls backed up.
1:30 a.m. Officers Perez and Suros respond to a 911 call. This seems like a routine domestic dispute, but could the moon have played a part in triggering it?
We normally notice it, a full moon. People have a tendency to kind of lose control.
We're always a lot busier when you got a full moon, for whatever reason.
Some 911 workers in Dade County agree that emergency calls increase during a full moon.
There's been plenty of nights I've worked on full moons and it's gotten crazy in here. And other nights when it's not a full moon, it's a lot slower.
Yet as the night wore on, there was no sign of the moon generating a crime wave in Miami. Even though it was the peak of the weekend, fewer calls came in than on a slow weeknight. A dispatcher explained this was simply an off night.
I believe that on a full moon we receive more calls. They're stranger in nature than normally, and I really believe that. And I think you can ask most anybody here who actually speaks to the public and takes calls, and they would tell you the same thing.
In 1972, psychiatrist Arnold Lieber reviewed 4,000 homicides spanning 10 years in Dade County. The results, he announced, were astounding. As the moon grew full, the number of homicides rose. Murder in Dade County peaked at the full moon. Lieber came to the same morbid conclusion after studying homicides in Cleveland. Yet when researchers examined Lieber's work, they concluded his statistical procedures were flawed. Other studies have consistently failed to find any link between crime and the moon. In Dade County, more often it's the weekend rather than the full moon that brings a rise in crime.
I think there's going to be certain nights, certain days when there are going to be more calls, it's going to be busier. For example, Fridays, Saturday nights. No, I don't think there's more craziness going on just because of the full moon. Didn't find it?
So why do people believe the moon can drive us crazy? Sheer coincidence. If you expect something to happen in a full moon, and something does, you remember it. So says astronomer Neil Cummins.
Most of these things have been disproved. And when you go into examine why people think that activities during a full moon are greater, you find that it's a matter of expectation.
On this same night in a local maternity ward, the nurses have their own expectations. They're bracing for a rush of babies.
I don't know the reason why, but when it's a full moon, we have lots of patients coming in and delivering.
When the moon changes, you have definite surges in the population here.
But once again, the moon fails to produce.
Last night was pretty quiet the night before, but it was a full moon, of course. Usually on full moons, you see a lot more mommies coming in. At least that's been my experience.
She's a week and a half overdue, so she's ready for something.
Baby Marlena, a sturdy 9 pounds, was the only baby born in the hospital that night, well below the average of 3 births per night for local hospitals. And what of poor Peter Stubb, transfigured into a werewolf by the devil's spell? His confession came only after hours of torture. For 25 years, no one had noticed his trail of death until he confessed to it. Nevertheless, his punishment was swift. For the superstitious citizens of Bedburg, all the evidence they needed was a tall tale and a full moon. Blue moon, moonglow, moonlight serenade. Clair de Lune, Moon River. It's only a paper moon. Where would lovers and lyricists be without the moon to inspire them? For true believers like Rosemary Ellen Guiley, the moon goes deeper than the heart.
The sun and the moon are at the foundation of who we are, our part on Earth and our part in the cosmos. So I think that the moon has this deep effect on us that plays out in our lives, whether we're aware of it or not.
In Vancouver, British Columbia, modern witches wouldn't dream of making a change without consulting the moon. According to devotees of the Wiccan religion, the moon is bursting with cosmic fuel. All they have to do is tap it.
Clearly, the moon does give energy, and if we can attune ourselves to it, become aware of it and conscious of it, then we can put our lives into sync and use that really creatively and productively.
These ceremonies, called Esbats, are held 13 times each year at the full moon.
Guardians of the South, spirits of fire, symbol of...
To the Wiccans, the moon is like a giant faucet, pouring its energy upon them. The full moon floods them with its power. At the new moon, it shrinks to a trickle. But each phase of the moon can hold a witch in its spell. For some people, the idea that the moon nourishes life applies to plants as well as people. For decades, Taylor Reese and Jack Pyle have followed the moon cycles to sow and reap in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina.
We know that the moon has an influence on the tides, and it also has an influence on everything on Earth.
The Old Farmer's Almanac advises that flowers and vegetables bearing crops above the ground should be planted when the moon is new. Plants bearing crops below ground should be sown during the full moon.
Above the ground crops, or annuals, are planted from the new moon when there's all of this moon energy growing, because you need that in order to make the plant germinate.
At the least, the moon neatly organizes your chores. While there's little evidence that following these rules, following the moon, guarantees a good harvest, there's no evidence it does any harm. The moon was the subject of the world's first science fiction film. Until our lifetime, most of what we knew about it was pure speculation. A Trip to the Moon was created by George Méliès in 1902. 67 years later, Méliès' fantasy became reality.
Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. Roger, Tranquility, we copy.
In July 1969, astronauts Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin became the first men to walk on the moon. They had two missions: to collect a precious cargo of moon rocks and to have fun. The moon's surface gravity, after all, is just 1/6 of Earth's. The astronauts didn't carry moonbeams home in a jar, but they did the next best thing. For the first time, scientists held the moon in the palm of their hand. The result was a startling new theory of its origins. Soon after our Earth formed, we wandered into the path of a planetoid the size of Mars, hurtling toward us at 25,000 miles an hour. The impact released the explosive power of 1 billion trillion tons of TNT. 5 billion cubic miles of dust and rock were flung into orbit around the Earth. If that's how it happened, it was the greatest shock ever to the Earth system, according to Graham Ryder of the Lunar and Planetary Institute in Texas.
Yeah, it's like a punch on the nose. It's a big bang, and then stuff goes all over the place. The pieces all came together from being separate objects into one object. They gradually stuck together by hitting each other but not bouncing off, forming one big body from lots of small ones.
As the dust settled, the moon began its endless orbit around the Earth. But the trip has been rocky. For 4 billion years, the moon has been pelted by meteors. Their impact built up its soil, called regolith. Before the space program, no one knew the depth of the regolith layer. Some speculated that anything landing on the moon would be instantly buried in the dust. When the lunar module touched down, it sank only a few inches, much to everyone's relief. But in places, the dusty soil is 60 feet deep. Most likely, the Earth once resembled the Moon. Over eons, wind, water, and the movements of its crust have erased most craters from its surface. Ours is one of the largest moons in our solar system. With a diameter of 2,160 miles, it would almost reach from Washington, D.C. to Los Angeles. In its reduced gravity field, a 162-pound astronaut weighs a wispy 27 pounds. Despite its prominence, or because of it, the Earth's moon is the only one that lacks a proper name. Jupiter boasts Europa and Ganymede. Around Saturn orbits the planet-sized Titan. Our satellite we simply call Moon. Although only 1/80th the mass of the Earth, the Moon holds us in its sway. It drives the ocean's tides, of course, but it does far more. It helped create life on Earth. Astronomer Neil Cummins.
When the Moon first formed, it was much closer than it is today, at least 10 times closer. At that time, the tides were 1,000 times higher, and they rolled inland miles and miles each cycle, and they brought out to sea with them huge amounts of the debris from the land. This material mixing in the oceans became the primordial soup in which life began.
We can thank the Moon for helping to start life on dry land 4 billion years ago. But can it affect our lives today? Astronomers remain unconvinced. They point out a fundamental flaw. The tug of the Moon on plants or animals or humans is minute. The gravitational pull of a single sheet of paper has about the same force as the Moon. The Moon produces tides only in bodies of water that are vast and unbounded. There are no tides in ponds or lakes, or in small bodies like ours. Still, the notion persists that the Moon somehow holds us in its spell. It's even reported to influence Lady Luck.
Oh, I definitely think that the Moon being full affects your gambling. Yes, I think it's positive. I think you're going to win a lot more because your spirits are higher. You feel better.
Las Vegas, a city built on luck, is a gambler's mecca and a mirage. Every year, visitors bet tens of billions of dollars and lose most of it. The odds are stacked against us. If they weren't, casinos would go bankrupt. But can the Moon give us an edge? Casinos are secretive about their business, but the Continental Casino in Las Vegas made an exception. For 4 years, researchers at the University of Nevada were given the daily drop, the amount of money bet, and the take, the amount gamblers won back. These figures revealed that on average, our odds of winning increase by 2% if we gamble when the Moon is full. That doesn't seem like much, but it adds up. Each year, Vegas casinos lose over $200 million simply because of the full Moon.
If it's going to be a full moon, you know, I feel lucky. I'll come to the casino and I'll take a shot.
So the next time you plan a gambling vacation, check the phase of the Moon before you hit the casinos. But don't wait too long. This little bit of luck won't last forever. The Moon, it seems, is leaving us. When the crew of Apollo 12 blasted off from the Moon in November 1969, they left an experiment behind. They set up an array of reflectors pointing at Earth. Back on Earth, researchers directed laser beams at the reflectors, measuring the time light takes to reach the Moon and bounce back. The experiment showed the Moon is spiraling away 1.5 inches farther every year. One day, it'll disappear. But we won't have to worry about that for 15 billion years. Unless, of course, an asteroid finds it first.
If the moon suddenly disappeared, it would ruin your whole day. It would not be fun at all.
The first effects would be temporary but devastating. Freed from the restraining influence of the moon, the oceans would become as unruly as they were before the moon was born. Enormous tidal waves would flood the world's coasts. New York, London, and Tokyo could vanish like Atlantis. Throughout the Pacific Basin, the impact of tsunamis on fault lines could trigger earthquakes and awaken volcanoes. For a few weeks or months, tornadoes, hurricanes, and snowstorms would devastate our world. Then, the trouble would start.
Now, if the moon suddenly disappeared, boom, gone, the Earth would have energy of motion that it had a moment ago, and that energy would stay with it. It would essentially be flung out some distance. That would change the Earth's path around the sun.
The tilt of the Earth's axis would change too, forever altering the seasons. Depending on how much it tilts, we could have Arctic winters and broiling summers throughout the planet. Or else the weather would be stuck exactly as it is the day the moon vanished. Our moonless planet would still have tides, now driven solely by the gravitational pull of the sun. They would be 1/3 the height of high tide now, and stay there. No high and low tides. Lowly plankton, dependent on the changing tides, would be the first to suffer, along with those creatures that hunt by moonlight. The food chain would start breaking one link at a time. The fallout doesn't stop there. Moon worshippers would have their faith sorely tested. Lunar gardeners would have a tough row to hoe. Lovers would lose moonlit walks. Poets would lose their muse. And we'd all need to find some other explanation for our good luck and bad. Created from the debris of our own planet, the moon is truly Mother Earth's child. For 4 billion years, it's been our constant, benign companion. The more light science sheds on the moon, the more myths it dispels. And yet one universal truth remains. Simply because it's there, the moon lured mankind into space. Now it tempts us with visions of colonizing the galaxy and spreading life throughout the cosmos. What other object is so enchanting?